Hi, this is Joel Rosenberg with All Arab News, and I want to welcome to All Arab News for the first time a former advisor to the Palestinian negotiating team, someone who was born and raised in this area and who is very, very deeply connected to Palestinian politics and the peace process. Ghaith Al-Omari is a fellow with the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, and I believe you're joining me from Washington. Where are you right now, Ghaith?
In Washington, that's correct.
You are, okay.
Yeah.
Wonderful. And where exactly were you born and raised?
I was born and raised in Jordan, in
Okay.
Amman, Jordan. A country that has always been interlinked with the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. So, like many, I grew up with this conflict as a very formative part of my childhood and young adulthood.
Indeed. So take just a moment to set the stage. Your role between 1999, 2001, this was a very interesting period in which really the first, I think, significant, at least from an Israeli perspective, significant offer was made to the Palestinians with some sort of concrete definition to it, the best we can understand, by then Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak. What was your role in all of this?
If you specifically mean the Camp David summit, I was an advisor to the Palestinian negotiating team, and I was a participant of that team in Camp David. So I was in Camp David, part of that negotiations. Was a very fascinating moment. I mean, we had some very significant breakthroughs. I think things were not ripe yet. But to my mind, that moment was a moment where we defined, until now, what we see as the contours of a solution, but it was also a missed opportunity, and in my view, from all sides, a missed opportunity.
Just to be clear, missed opportunity on the Palestinian side. Why? Should Arafat have taken that deal?
I don't think the deal was ripe to be taken. I think what Arafat should have done was come up with a counter offer. And to be very clear, we had counter offers. I mean, we had plan A, plan B, plan C. It was a tactical approach by Arafat to simply say no and demand for more. I think that was a mistake. I think what the Israelis and the Americans felt from this approach was that the Palestinians were not serious and they only could say no. If Arafat had responded with counter offers that showed some flexibility, I think at least he would have gained President Clinton, and probably for many members of the Israeli team would have shown a degree of seriousness.
So to be clear, the team had multiple counter offer options that had been sort of war gamed out, or else war game might not be the right term, peace gamed out, but Arafat chose not to offer one of them.
Absolutely. He chose not to do that. And look, part of it I have to understand. I understand in that this is the way that also Barak responded in previous negotiations that we've had. So there is a history of doing this, but I think it was a strategic mistake, and I think we continue to pay the price until today.
Well, President Clinton got very angry at Arafat for this.
He absolutely did, because he felt that Arafat, rather than engage
Okay, I'm not sure if you can hear me. We lost your connection for a moment.
Yeah.
Let's redo that section, and the editors will clean it up. So I'm going to ask you that part again.
Okay. Sorry. I can if we continue breaking it, I can actually go on my phone if that's easier.
All right. Well, let's see what we do.
Let's see what we do.
Ideally, we do. Now, President Clinton got quite angry at Yasser Arafat for essentially walking out on the deal, even if it wasn't, an ideal offer from the Israelis. Clinton's anger towards Arafat, I think, affected the relationship, did it not?
Not only did it, I mean, first of all, yes, you are absolutely right. Clinton was very angry because he felt that there was no seriousness. I mean, to be very fair, Barak did take some very risky moves. I mean, it was the first time an Israeli prime minister expressed willingness to divide Jerusalem. That's a big deal for an Israeli. I think Clinton felt that Arafat was not willing to take similar risks and was not engaged in a meaningful way. And he was angry. Not only was he angry, I think that defined the view of successive American administrations and the public perception of the Palestinian position. So Arafat's approach was not only a tactical mistake, I think it had strategic implications.
Now, in 2008, then Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert was working with, of course, Arafat's successor, Mahmoud Abbas. Based on all the reporting at the time, and I don't think it's in dispute, Abbas effectively said no, but actually didn't really give an answer to an offer that many Israelis believe was even more generous than Barak.
I mean, okay, I don't like the term generous, but I would say that what Olmert offered, in my view, was the most that any Israeli leader could offer. I think what Olmert offered was actually ultimately what a deal would look like. Um, Abbas's reaction, unfortunately, was a precursor to a pattern where rather than responding, he would delay, not give an answer, not say a no, but not delay. He did that with President Clinton, with President Obama, and with others. To my mind, that was the main missed opportunity. That was the one time where I felt the process was ripe, and Abbas failed to take it. Now I understand why he did not take it. He has his reasons. Olmert was indicted, etc., etc. But I think that was a moment that called for leadership, for taking risks, and Abbas simply did not rise up to the moment.
Let me make sure I understood you correctly. You just said, as I understood it, that it was the most that an Israeli prime minister could offer. Do you think of it, the 2008 offered by Olmert, as the high water mark, at which point the offers are starting, what there have been, are starting to recede?
Absolutely. I mean, the offers were starting to recede and the reality was starting to change. The reality in Israel, where there was a major shift in Israeli politics, the reality in the region, where we're seeing the implications today, but with also a moment of, I think, fatigue, international fatigue. There was a moment where I think this is the moment where Abbas's own image was formed, and this is the moment where the world felt enough is enough, and that there was no seriousness on this file. So since then, yes, things started going downhill in terms of the actual offers and downhill in terms of the realities, both on the ground and in the surrounding region.
Now, one of the reasons that I started All Arab News, in addition to our sister site, All Israel News, is because I knew that there would be many of my own personal contacts in the Arab Muslim world, but also the Arab Christian world and others, that would not yet be comfortable yet in this environment to appear or to be interviewed or quoted by a site called All Israel News. Now, I didn't ask you which side you want to be on, but I think it's important that someone who was part of the Palestinian negotiating team has a deep interest in and love for the Palestinian people and cause, that you, of course, would be interviewed on All Arab News. One of the things that's caught my attention as I've been following your work is that you are maybe a bit of a contrarian at the moment in terms of people involved in the Palestinian cause who are saying that this peace deal between the United Arab Emirates and Israel could be a win-win-win. Your words, that the Palestinians could leverage this to their advantage. And I think it's important for our listeners, our viewers, and our readers, many of whom may have on the Israel side, obviously very pro-Israel, but I want to hear directly, I want them to hear your view, which is clearly not the reigning view in Ramallah at the moment.
First of all, this is one of the privileges of living in the United States. One can speak one's mind and with great sense of safety. And here I would just like to make a nod of appreciation to all the Palestinians on the ground who are actually standing up and presenting their own views. Now, why do I think it's a win-win-win? First of all, I think it is a reality. It's a reality that the Palestinians either accept and try to make the best of, or they will be left behind. But beyond kind of this minimalist view, I think it offers opportunities. First of all, I think it is a moment that for the Israelis and the Emiratis This is a significant moment that should be celebrated. Peace in its own right is something to be celebrated. But beyond that, for the Palestinians, look, I mean, I look at history. The Arab countries that have made peace with Israel, Egypt, and then Jordan, are the ones that have been most effective in pushing for Palestinian interests and rights. I saw it as a negotiator. Ask anyone on the American side, on the Israeli side, they will tell you Mubarak, King Hussein, King Abdullah, Sisi are the ones who are pushing, who are helping. So I'm very happy to have a country that is as capable as the UAE joining this grouping. That's one. Two, frankly, look, the Palestinian approach of trying to just simply isolate Israel and almost freeze time has not producing. And I think this UAE-Israel moment deal is a moment that should force the Palestinian leadership towards a reality check and an adjustment in the way that they conduct diplomacy. Now, there are many ways they can do it. They can push for wider inclusion of Arab states in a formal way in the negotiations. We have something called the Quartet, where that's the US, Russia, UN, and the EU. Why not add the three Arabs with maybe Saudi Arabia in the background? There's the Arab Peace Initiative, which has been an all or nothing proposal. Why not look at it as a gradual process where Israel does something for the Palestinians? There's a response by the Arab states in similar magnitude. By the way, one thing that, as a former Palestinian negotiator, I admire about the Emirati-Israeli deal is the fact that it re-established the idea of linkage. It was no coincidence that the UAE insisted on a freeze of annexation. As part of that, they have set a precedent. I think it behooves the Palestinians to look at these opportunities rather than just wait and let time pass them by.
Do you think that other countries, let's take Bahrain, for example, Oman, Morocco, ultimately the big prize, of course, for Israel would be a peace treaty with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. In addition to just watching how this plays out with their own publics and to see what UAE gets from the United States for this, can you see a scenario in which Bahrain, for example, let's say they're ready to go next, but thinks of what's the next thing to ask for from Israel that would advance a potential Israeli-Palestinian deal?
I would frankly leave this to the sides. There's a whole menu of issues that can be asked, from the big political issues, and here we can look at what the Palestinians want, whether it is a firm Israeli recommitment to the two-state solution, whether it is action on settlements, etc. These big political issues. But there's also a large menu of small but concrete and very significant issues that relate to economy in the West Bank, that relate to access and movement, that relate to maybe even extending the jurisdiction of the Palestinian Authority on larger parts of the West Bank. How do you leverage, for example, the security coordination, which until recently was one of the high moments, and how do you have political dividends? So there is a large menu of both diplomatic and practical issues to present. But also there's another track that the Arab countries can take that relates to the US itself. The Palestinians have their own reservations, and the Arabs have their reservations on President Trump's peace plan. It would be interesting if some of the countries, and here I think Saudi Arabia is the prime candidate, to come to the US and say, why don't we reopen this American offer and maybe modify it in a way that will allow the Palestinians to move forward. So again, there is, I think, no limit to the creativity that we can use here. These are some of my thoughts. Others have other thoughts. The challenge right now is to seize the moment and to take initiative, because otherwise, I think what could be a promising moment could end up being a wasted opportunity.
Two last questions for you, and I'm enjoying the conversation. It's fascinating. You've got a fascinating perspective, and it's I think it's one that's very important that people hear. So one is Mahmoud Abbas. So in many ways, he has as much stature as any Palestinian is going to have, having been Yasser Arafat's deputy, to make a peace deal if he comes up with the plan that he internally and his team feel is their best case scenario going forward. But I will tell you that just as an observer, maybe biased. Okay, I'm Jewish, American, Israeli, and an evangelical, but I have a great love for the Palestinian people, and I want there to be peace. I'm supposed to pray for the peace of Jerusalem, so I'm doing that. Um, my perception, and I think many people's perception, is that Abbas has made a decision that he does not want to go down in history as someone that gave up anything, that sacrificed or compromised in any way for the full maximalist Palestinian cause. And at his age, I mean, he could just decide just to stonewall until God takes him from this earth. So, is that what's happening, or do you see a scenario in which he could be persuaded to take a different route?
First of all, maybe a reaction to your first comment. I don't think that being Jewish, evangelical, or whatnot excludes being pro-Palestinian, and this is one thing that I think.
Thank you. And
what one of the I'm using this as a hook, but one of the I think we're
all right, we're freezing up. 1 second. I'm not hearing you. 1 second. All right, we're okay.
Sorry.
So we need a moment. So all right, so the connection cleared up. So why don't you begin? We'll leave the question, but now your response.
Yeah. So I mean, let me maybe first to your initial point. I think there is no one of the worst dynamics in this conflict is that many people believe that to be pro-Palestinian means to be anti-Israeli, or to be pro-Israeli means anti-Palestinian. And I think, the model that you and others present, that you can be pro both, even if you're rooted in one of the two sides, is the way forward. Now, about Abbas. Look, I mean, I don't like to speak about intentions. And so let me speak about my analysis of political reality.
Okay.
I don't think that Abbas is capable politically right now to reach a peace deal. If you look, all politics is local. And if you look at his legitimacy, it is in question. It is in question because of the failure of the peace process. It is in question because of failure of governance. When 80% of the Palestinians tell you their government is corrupt and is incapable of delivering, it's hard to see legitimacy there to kind of make the huge concessions that we need. That said, I do not lose hope. And to my mind, it's always fascinating to see how leaders change when they are leaders. To my mind, Ariel Sharon was maybe the poster boy for this. Someone who came as the father of the whole settlement enterprise. Someone who, in Palestinian perception, was as close to evil as you can get them. Ends up being the Israeli prime minister who actually evacuates Gaza. So I think leaders change, but leaders change when reality changes. And I think right now what we need to focus on is rebuilding legitimacy on the Palestinian domestic scene. That requires certainly progress on the peace process, even if it is not a peace deal, because I don't think it's possible, but there are small steps that we can take to rehabilitate the idea that cooperation works, practical steps, but also we need to reestablish legitimacy by rebuilding a clean, transparent government that the Palestinian people can have trust in, first to govern them, and then to make concessions on their behalf. So rather than going right now for big diplomatic solutions, and by the way, this is my criticism of both President Trump's approach and before him, President Obama's approach. The time is not right. Let's focus on real concrete steps that will help Palestinians and Israelis and will change the very negative dynamic that we have right now. And once that happens, I would not exclude it for Abbas or anyone else to change and seize the moment. But right now, there is no moment to seize.
Okay. Last question for now, and I appreciate it. On Tuesday, there will be the formal signing of the UAE-Israel peace agreement. Maybe summarize your perspective on how the world should be looking at that signing from the perspective of what could be the future for the Palestinian people.
First of all, I think the agreement has to be celebrated in its own right. It is a significant moment for the Israelis, for the Emiratis, and a clear win for American diplomacy, President Trump's diplomacy. So to my mind, this has to be acknowledged. the world should start looking at this in terms of how do we leverage this to help advance the Palestinian-Israeli track. The world should have honest conversations with the Palestinians in which they assure them of the continued support of their fundamental positions, the idea of a two-state solution, etc., while at the same time making it very clear that time will not stop. I think your voice, especially in the evangelical community, is an extremely, extremely valuable voice. I think we need to hear more of this. And, you know, when I talked about being pro-Israel and not being anti-Palestinian and stuff like this, I think this is something that many evangelicals, many Israelis just don't get. And the more that we can have voices kind of, you know, stressing this point, I think this is a conversation, this is a discourse that needs to be had. So thank you.
So I want to thank Ghaith Al-Omar, former Palestinian negotiator, as well as a fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. From the Holy Land, I'm Joel Rosenberg for All Arab News.